Hello, and welcome to MarketMuse Content Strategy webinar today. I'm your host and the co-founder and chief product officer for MarketMuse, Jeff Coyle. Today's discussion is entitled How Natural Language Processing Helps You Create Better Content. And it's going to be a discussion focused on NLP innovations that are driving content decisions through businesses from small, medium businesses all the way up to enterprise. But before I intro our special guest today, a few housekeeping notes. Ask us questions in the GoToWebinar and we'll either get them in line if they're relevant, or we'll hit as many as we can. In everything that overflows, we'll personally answer via email. So the recording and notes are also going to be made available after the webinar, and they'll be sent out via email. So look for those, and also please go download the rest of the recordings. We have an amazing collection from startup founders like Brendan White from Cortex, sales visionaries like Bob Apollo, SEO superstars like Andy Crestodina, and just brilliant people like Kevin Indig. If you download multiple recordings this week, shoot me an email and we'll personally set up a content strategy session with a MarketMuse content advisory team lead. Now for our very special guest today, he's the CEO and founder at Earley Information Science, where he focuses on AI, knowledge engineering, data management, metadata governance, and my favorite, ontologies and taxonomy management. His strategic advisory on information management has really impacted the world's most recognized brands and government agencies. He continues to bring large businesses together by focusing on something that's near and dear to my heart, but it's customer experience in information architecture. He's got a new book available for pre-order on Amazon, which we're going to put a link at the end of this presentation, called The AI-Powered Enterprise, which I hope we get to talk to at the tail end of today's discussion. So without further ado, Seth Earley, thanks for joining us today.
Thanks, Jeff, and it's great to participate in this webinar. And what I'm starting to see is organizations are paying more attention to intentional content, right? They're looking at the very specific needs of users, but for large organizations, there's such a massive amount of content that they have. One of our clients has 2 million pieces of content on their website, large global enterprise. And the problem is, how do you know how that's fitting in with your users? How do you know that's the right content? A lot of times people have content creation organizations and content operations that put the stuff up there and then forget about it. So it's interesting to start to see the return to very intentional approaches around this. And just from my background, I think if people are not familiar with me, I've been in the information management space for over 20 years. I was a co-author of a book on knowledge management many years ago, which actually was about Lotus and IBM's first foray into machine learning. It was called the Lotus Discovery Server, for those of you who remember Lotus. Lotus did poorly what nothing else could do at all, that's what we used to say. But that product, that tool, was their first iteration. That became something called OmniFind from IBM. DNA went into Watson. So the stuff we're looking at today has been around for a long time, but there are many, many more applications that are very, very practical, that you don't need a master's degree in information science in order to use. You don't need the heavy duty, mathematics and code jockeys. This is stuff you can take advantage of today. And that's what's exciting about some of the things we're going to be talking about.
Yeah, it's one thing that, I just last week at Content Marketing World, I was talking about content strategy with natural language processing as well. And, I didn't have enough space to put all of the list of free applications that are even available now for all different use cases. And I think that that's something that I will definitely get into is that the applied natural language processing is happening in 17 different branches. We obviously can't talk of all of them. But one thing I did before we get started was talk about how do you and how does Earley Information Science think about AI with respect to things like content creation and information architecture? How do those weave together in the work that you do? Mm-hmm.
Well, what's interesting is we've been working in this space for a number of years. We built a virtual assistant for Allstate several years ago that beat Watson to market by multiple generations. It was one of the first generations of these things. So you used the knowledge architecture, used the component architecture. And that, what's interesting about AI is people say, oh, you need to train the AI. You need, we're not done training it. I need more budget. You have to training content. Well, what do you train the AI with? You train it with content, with knowledge, with data. And it can't be just any data. We used to have people who on our webinars, they say things like, oh, just point the AI to all of your information. No, that's not how it works, right? You have to be very intentional about defining the architecture so that you understand how it can be retrieved by these types of tools. Now, AI does a lot of great stuff for us. There's a lot that we can do with content curation and content processes and content analysis and auto tagging and classification and so on, and different relationships. But the big thing that we're trying to do when you think about AI in those circumstances is make up for our sins in content, in our content strategy, in our content curation, right? When we use different terms to describe the same thing, well, that's a data architecture issue, but semantic search and AI will overcome that by using, by resolving, by classifying things according to user intent. And again, user intent isn't a single thing. You have to be able to have multiple ways of pulling this content back. When we did this for Allstate, there was a couple thousand use cases, thousands of pieces of content, but it could be pulled back as an answer to a question rather than a list of documents. And the biggest thing that's happening these days with regard to AI from the corporate perspective is organizations are understanding that their content needs a very specific purpose. Many times you have organizations creating content for the sake of creating content, because that's what they're doing. We were with a Medicare administrative contractor a while back. There's 20 people in their content documentation, content creation group, and they were creating hundreds of documents every week. And I went to a workshop and I held up a piece of content and I said, tell me, what's this for? Who reads it? Why? No one could answer that question, right?
Yeah.
So why are you creating content if no one is accessing it? So what you're doing with these use cases and scenarios and building these things out for question answer, you're thinking much more intentionally about the purpose of your content. And a big issue around the purpose of the content is, again, how do people think about their problem? What terminology do they use? And what's their mental model? And all of that needs to be aligned with the information architecture. So my point on AI, and it's been around for a long time. It's a rebranding of many things we've done, over the years, like text analytics is now, AI. Forrester called cognitive computing knowledge management's grand makeover, because again, it's you look at these projects and they're information retrieval projects, and whether it's or pattern recognition projects, but they require a foundational architecture, because those tools will not tell you what's important to your users. That's stuff that you have to do with other ways.
I mean, yeah, I think you said it right on, and that's a clear takeaway. Hopefully we'll get into more details on, but it's that intentional content creation. It's mapping what you build or have built to user intent profiles. And if the intent is unclear, make it clear. If the intent that is you're trying to focus on particular searchers and the span of what they might be searching for is wide. They may be early stage awareness. They may be looking for later in the funnel. They may be post-purchase troubleshooting, and that's really where I think a good segue for some of the discussion topics for today is to say, we're looking to focus on how these innovations in natural language processing. A quick definition, though, it's a field of linguistics, like you said, but it's also a heavy part of artificial intelligence, information management, computer science. And when we say natural language processing, we're focusing on how we can design and develop computer programs and solutions that take in massive amounts of language data and turn it into valuable insights and applications. And if we're looking to apply that for content planning and content research, what we want to talk about today and focus on is how these innovations in natural language processing are have created relatively unknown applications that can be used to upgrade and toss away some of these manual and flawed processes in creation and planning. And, you know, one of the key things we talk about a lot, and Seth, we have as well, is that, you know, standard traditional keyword research doesn't think about intent. It doesn't think about quality. And it doesn't necessarily connect with guarantees that the recipient of the research is going to create great content that applies to, you know, what you were just talking about, that intention. Does it answer the questions? Does it provide value? Does it fit with what you've already produced? And so, like what you were saying, you know, what do you typically see as far as issues go when you're evaluating a client's or prospect's content processes and organization? That if they have been only focused on keywords, or maybe they haven't been focused on anything, it's just create.
Yeah, we find that, you know, especially in large enterprises, you know, there's a lot of acts of heroics when it comes to content management, content creation, content operations. There's a lot of chaos. Creating content and thinking of what the right content is and solving problems is a creative process. It's a problem-solving process, and it's inherently messy, right? But then when you need to start reusing content or structuring it for the website or structuring it for a user, you have to be very intentional about beginning to add structure to it. So, you know, this starts with a messy process, and then it should graduate to a process where you're more formally tagging, vetting, editing, organizing the information for your target users. But many times organizations don't really get there very well. You know, they have a big mess on their hands, and, you know, they're trying things like personalization, but it's artisan personalization, it's handcrafted personalization. And then you end up with an overload of all of these documents that maybe they were relevant to someone at one point, but they're not really relevant anymore. And they're just cluttering up the website. They're just cluttering up the search results, and they're not necessarily solving a specific problem. So, you know, again, getting organizations focused on that user journey, getting them focused on the personas and the use cases. Why will someone pull this information back? If they go to this place on the website, what are they expecting? If they're searching on this term, what are they really trying to do? Because search terms are short, they're ambiguous, and they're approximation of the user's real information need. So you really have to guide people. You know, you don't walk up to somebody at a conference with no context and say, insurance, you know, or whatever, or computer. You know, you don't do that. You have a context. You see the body language. You know what you're doing. So search terms, when people use those short search terms, they're not really expressing their intent very well. And so getting into longer phrases is important. That'll also be a little bit easier for you to rank on. But it's trying to really get a detailed, in-depth understanding of the user's problem and their mental models. And natural language processing is a way of harmonizing and extending the concepts, right? If somebody is searching on a particular term or particular phrase, it's saying, well, what is this representative of? What are the other concepts it's related to? And that is an information architecture problem. And it's also an understanding of the user's intent. Now, there's also natural language understanding, and I think that's a bit of a misnomer because computers don't truly understand. But again, they can act on certain things. So the processing part here is saying, you know, when people are using these terms, what are they really intending? And then do we have a clear enough understanding of what the needs of our target users are? Have we done real user journeys, not just hypothetical ones? Have we done primary research? So many organizations think they understand their user and their needs, and they really don't. So I'm sorry, that was a long answer to your question, but we usually see a lot of chaotic processes. We usually see a lack of a detailed understanding. We see a lot of hypothetical use cases. We see a lot of ambiguity in use cases. So, you know, there's a lot of work that needs to be done to improve that maturity. And in order for people to do more advanced things like personalization, you know, they have to get the basics right.
Yeah, I think that two things from what you just said that I'll take away, and definitely for anyone listening, is it's artisan personalization is hilarious. That's number one. And two, that, you know, handcrafted personalization. I love it.
Yeah, he has a ponytail. Yeah. Anyway.
Yeah, and then also like it's a information search or a searcher behavior that isn't modeled typically in real life. I'm not at Content Marketing World last week going content marketing question mark, but
Yeah, right,
in the searcher's experience, that illustrates intent fracture. So what you receive from the search results is what they favor. It's what they believe is likely the intent, but they may present results that have multiple intents, and hope you pick one. And the root of all this is a lot of natural language processing systems. I mean, all of search comes from concepts like parsing and part of speech tagging and stemming and word segmentation and segmentation.
Lemmatization.
Yeah.
I like lemmatization. That's one of my favorite
Lemmatization is
terms.
a good one.
Lemmatization. Yeah.
Yes, that's always a good one. If anyone wants to go look up lemma, that's a good one. If from all these things are at the root of what it means to put your best foot forward with your content, and sometimes putting your best foot forward, like you mentioned, is putting your best foot forward behind the scenes in that meta information. If you're marking up your content with schema markup, and so when you see people who have historically manually tagged content or they're using static databases, how does that lead to organizational waste? Because I mean we can only analyze a finite amount of data for content creation.
Sure.
If we're doing it manually, we may be in a state where we have huge organizational debt to make up before we can even start using AI.
Yeah, and I'll tell you that's a really good point, because the reason why organizations get so intimidated by this and they get paralyzed and they don't necessarily do much is because of the overwhelming amount of information, and they don't necessarily know how to deal with that. It's a tsunami here. It's a tsunami of information, and so when you have to have automated processes. You cannot humanly do this. I think we calculated something that took that would be an audit and a review of all this content would be like 10,000 years or something, 10,000 person years, right? Whatever it is, it's just crazy numbers. So you have to have automated approaches, and you have to be able to understand a knowledge graph of your concepts and what's important to your customers, and then compare that knowledge graph to your content. You're basically taking a set of relationships around concepts and terms that are important to your customers and to your selling proposition, and you're saying, what do these all relate to? Just like just like if you go to IMDb movie database, you can see what movies this actor has been in, and then what producers have been part of these movies, and then the 6 degrees of separation from Kevin Bacon type of game. But those relationships, those conceptual relationships, are really important to understand for your organization, because you can overlay that becomes a knowledge scaffolding. Right. The ontology, the knowledge graph, the information architecture, that becomes scaffolding that you can then put your knowledge and your content on. And if stuff doesn't fit in the scaffolding, get rid of it, right? Yep. And what other content do you need that's going to fill in these conceptual gaps, right? Because again, it's really about understanding language in a way that is more human to human. And because people have different mental models and they think of things differently, they're going to have different concepts. They're going to use different terms. They're going to look at their problem in a different way. And we have to be able to anticipate those variations in people's mental models with our architecture. And then we have to be able to analyze large amounts of content, not from a keyword perspective, but from a concept perspective.
Exactly. And yeah, the big takeaways from what you just said from me are that, the answer, if you're not automating, is that you're probably not doing it, right? And so if you can't, how often is your business? How often can a mid-market or small enterprise or an enterprise really do a content inventory or a content audit without automation? I mean, maybe once a year with a dedicated team of 10 people or 5 people, or even just one person heads down. And in the reality of natural language processing today and language assessment and analysis is you can have that on demand. You can be doing these monthly. You can be doing these in some cases weekly, especially targeted audits, to answer questions like you posed. It's to say, okay, well, for this topic on my site, how well have I exhibited my company's subject matter expertise? Have I at all? Do I have major gaps? And that's the type of thing that we're able to, do that's much more complex than standard, applications of NLP, but that comes from being able to analyze massive quantities of data. And people don't get that type of information that's out there now, because they're thinking about natural language processing solely in the terms of these things on the screen right now, which is my voice recognition, my Siri, my autocomplete, my spell check. The reality of today's technology is, like you said, natural language understanding allows us to pick entities out of concepts and tell the story that, wow, okay, large bank, you've really covered your interests in checking accounts, but you're not talking about the fact that you're fantastic at everything related to equipment finance. You don't have anything that tells that story, but that's a huge product line. That's a big gap. You have one page. Is that really how you put your best foot forward? And it's really changing your thinking about the possibilities with NLP. What kinds of misconceptions do you see with when you run into businesses that they don't even know that some of this technology exists?
Right. Well, I think that there's a misconception about the level of talent that you need. Like, business people need to understand this stuff in a way that makes sense to them, not saying, oh, it's a proprietary algorithm and it's magic and we can't tell you and so on. I'd say end that meeting quickly, right? You
Yes.
need to understand from a conceptual and business perspective what's working. So I think there's a misconception that these things require all kinds of black magic and coding, and the special high priest of AI can only do this. These tools are becoming more and more usable, and it's really a democratization of data and analytics and AI and machine learning, because the heavy lifting has been done by these large organizations, and you don't have to write speech recognition algorithms anymore, right? Those are out of the box, but you need to learn how to apply these from a business perspective. I think that there's too much fear about the things people don't know, and there's and you have to remember, this is all about information management and information retrieval, whether it's from the customer side or from your internal side, and these things have to make sense. And so I think executives don't necessarily know what they have to fund, how they should fund it, or what they're going to get ROI from. In some cases, they're doing experiments and science experiments, which incurs stakeholder fatigue pretty quickly. But I think it's really that misconception about what they need to be successful, and thinking that it's beyond their capabilities.
Yeah, that's right on. And I think something you said, and I'd be interested in your perspective on this. One thing from buying team's perspective, or from an assessment perspective, is a lot of businesses, especially small enterprise to large enterprise, still think of content as a bit of a place to throw money at, and they're not really clear on attribution of ROI. So that applications in this vein, which require you to already have a culture of content or an understanding of ROI, can really influence the desire to do it without having that explicit ROI. Is that something that you find?
Yeah, and I think that people need to understand that more of this stuff is measurable than they think, right? And they have to be aligning these the investments in these areas with an objective that someone is measuring. Somebody cares about this, like website traffic or conversions or new leads or whatever it is. And sometimes there's this thinking that, oh, well, we have to put this content up and this is a cost and it's just part of the cost of doing business and we can't really justify it, but you can, and that's where we do a metrics-driven governance playbook for organizations. I'd be happy to send people information about that if you'd like, but it talks about how you need to tie the data scorecards to process scorecards to business outcome scorecards and align that with the enterprise strategy, and then show that linkage. Because too often people throw their hands up and say, oh, I can't justify this, or I can't. build a business case or the ROI isn't clear, but you can do that.
Well, yeah, it's not just that aspirational model, and we'll put that in the show notes that we send out with the recording. That link to that would be awesome. It's not just aspiration; it's aspirational and return on investment is possible with the justification. So it's you can actually say, hey, everyone at my business, we are never going to publish anything that isn't great. It's not that's not telling the story that we are experts, that we can answer our users' questions, that we're going to put out stuff that's better than all of our competitors every time. You can make that aspirational case and then pair it with, oh yeah, and by the way, if we do this, we rolled the dice over the last 10 years and 10% of our content is great, okay, just randomly. And it produces N millions of dollars. What if all of it was? What if 50% of it was? You can really start to build, you can build an ROI justification to pair with that aspirational model. And when you do that, that's how buying teams move things internally, especially at mid-market to enterprise. So I think that's a really good observation.
Yeah, and it's understanding. It comes down to understanding what the driver is of your business model and your customer engagement at each stage of their journey, at each process point, and what they need. And that's it comes down to use cases and scenarios, and understanding that user and being able to surface the content they need in the context in which they need it.
Right, and that's a great question for content relationships, and it's not just metadata in that situation. It's to say, what are the most likely next steps? How do you see businesses trying to figure out how to connect existing content together right now?
So I think a lot of it is haphazard. A lot of it is left into the hands of either a product manager or a content operations person. Marketing can be very disconnected from sometimes some of the needs of customers. Sometimes, it depends. They could be working in their silo and not necessarily getting access to some of the behaviors. We've also seen some parts of the organization be more analytics savvy than other parts of the organization. So some people are using more analytics to, understand the relationships of content and where people go, what that navigation path is from concept to concept or, problem to problem, and trying to understand, okay, what is, middle of the funnel content, and how do I identify somebody who's doing that, and what kinds of content is related to their journey at this point. And again, it's building out those relationships between content that's going to support how they understand their problem and how they understand their objective. And that's one of the challenges. It's so subjective sometimes, right? And as much as you can, you need to cast a wide net to be able to get the folks that you need. And so building those out can be kind of difficult because it's very time and labor intensive.
Yeah, and I've seen some businesses doing really great things with that. Looking at their most valuable pages and mapped against the funnel. So they're using data about from closed business. They're using data from opportunities that are in the funnel. They're using data about channels of people who read those and to even apply to say, okay, well, when somebody from this channel consumes these content items, that's the representative of my journey. And sometimes they find that there's channels that are different, but also that sometimes they find that they've got huge gaps in that journey. And people are having to make a leap, or their salesperson's having to make that leap, or some third party is making that leap. I always laugh. It's like a lot of times part of your journey is reading other people's content too. How can you react there? Because especially in a B2B purchase cycle, they might be going to a G2 crowd. They might be going to a Capterra or a Tech Target, and you've got to account for that in your journey, because that's a lot of that is happening. And if you're oblivious to that, you're missing something that's being consumed by users you care about, and that's something you can monitor and you can manage. And that's something that you've said it a number of times, but against mapping that content to the buyer journey. From you're typically in most cases. Well, actually, I'll ask you that. Are you typically working in mostly B2B? Do you have commercial intent or B2C applications?
We have both. Yeah, we have both. We've worked with B2B, B2C, B2B2C, and one of the large global manufacturers that we've worked with over the years, has so many different types of users and targets and personas that those user journeys are quite extensive, and it takes up like half a wall to map these things on, because again, the needs of those users, it's a diverse organization. It sells across multiple geographies, multiple industries. So who's that user? Well, there's lots of different types of users. So sometimes it's a matter of saying, and then how do I identify that user when they come to a site if they're not authenticated? Well, you can do that by looking at patterns of behavior that other known users have gone through in order to go to the next step, in order to get the conversion, in order to register the webinar or download the white paper or order a sample or, order the product, whatever it might be. But again, it's trying to understand all those different journeys and then being able to anticipate what that user, who you identify either through, lookalike audiences or through actual authentication and knowledge about them, but what is it that you need to give them at that moment to push them forward, and understanding that across users. And that's why it's so challenging to build these large product hierarchies and these large content hierarchies, because people have to self-select to get to the information that you've planned for them, right?
Yeah. Well, and that's real personalization, right? It's if you can authenticate, if you can, using patterns of their activity, if you can predict that they are at a particular stage, well, then you can say what's that next content piece that person should receive. And then prior to that, you have to create that item, right? Because if you don't have it, you can't put it there. So it's to say, if I know that somebody, when they read this article on my blog, and a lot of them do, well, people at this stage of the funnel, they need this one. People in the middle, they're going to move on to that one. People at the end of the funnel, I have to create a beautiful piece. And so that I take one blog, do some research about what it means to be an expert on this topic, and now I know what are the ones that will move the needle with those users. We just had we had a post that went out. It was really successful through multi-channel, and we designed 3 additional next step documents based on data on the site. And guess what? A lot of that late stage next step clickers are now deep in the discussions with MarketMuse, and that's the kind of application that you can do right now with these the software products. Not even just personalization platforms, but you can do it just with some traditional website management software platforms.
Some traditional artisan personalization, small batch personalization.
Small batch personalization.
Yeah, that's right. Small batch personalization. The thing that I wanted to kind of add to that was that insight and that knowledge and that understanding of what is appropriate and what's really going to inform this customer. That is human judgment, right? That is human creativity. The algorithm isn't going to do that for you. No AI will do that. It will help to identify concepts and topics and things that should be related, but it's not going to tell you that this particular content is going to be good for this individual user. I mean, it could do that based on behaviors after the fact, but you have to start somewhere. You have to start by seeding it.
Yeah, you gotta have enough examples. You gotta have some experience of those conversions to feed the system to say that I like this pattern, thus I wish to emulate this pattern, and so that's part of that training side. And one thing I was also going to ask is, when you think of content optimization, I know you think of this all the time. What components of content optimization, or the way that you think about this, that might not be how a search engine optimization professional thinks about it?
Well, that's a really great question, and the way we look at content optimization is it's multidimensional, right? It's not just about SEO, getting ranking on a particular couple of terms. I mean, you can get ranking and get the wrong audience, right? So the optimization is really a deep understanding of the role of the content, the purpose of the content, and making that content creation and management process efficient. And so, how are you tapping into subject matter experts? How are you harvesting the knowledge? How are you harvesting the insights, the expertise that a customer will value or a prospect will value? And then how do you get that into a workflow so that it is properly organized and tagged and vetted and edited and approved and then posted and then pushed out to the right audience, or in the case of organic search, testing and refining the results and the rankings over time, and trying to say, is this bringing us the right audience? If somebody's coming in on a very ambiguous term that we're ranking well on, like security, well, that's too broad. That might not be enough. We still get people searching for taxidermy on our side, but both the taxonomy, but it's funny because it's really trying to make sure that you're surfacing content that your users are looking for, that they want, that they demand, that they need. So feedback loops on those behaviors, analytics, testing with users, right? Just having discussions and focus groups. But it really is about that content. It's about the harvesting, everything from harvesting the expertise to organizing it, perhaps componentizing it, depending on how you want to distribute this, and then the process of fine-tuning it over time, because topics will change, right? The interest will change, your strategy will change, and so you have to guide your users and the subject matter experts in what things they should be thinking about as they're creating content. What themes, what terms, what phrases, what keywords, how should they be enriching that content? So that optimization process has lots of different pieces to it, and most organizations can really improve both their content operations, their content strategy, their content effectiveness, and there's so many new tools like the tools that you guys have that are incredibly valuable for that. And I'll just give this as my initial experience with your technology is that it's very powerful and it's very leverageable, and it's the type of thing that can provide very tangible direction and input, and then show a really clear ROI. And that's what you're trying to do. You're trying to do things that are not going to take multiple years to implement, right? You got to do this stuff quickly, and you got to show those results. And I think that there's so much that can be done on this side of the equation that organizations are not doing yet.
Well, one thing you said, and one thing you said, which is an explicit use case that is automated now with MarketMuse and with similar technologies, is to be able to automate that intent mismatch situation, and to say you may have achieved in search results, right? You may have achieved a page and gotten a page that ranks for 500 things. How likely is it that page is a great experience for all 500 of those queries? Not very, but nobody's been able to quantify that until topic modeling and natural language processing technologies have gotten to where they are today. And so that's something that we do, every one of our clients. It's to say, see this page, you're just sitting on it. We can turn that page into a cluster of content that actually answers all the questions that people have that are coming to this, that have this intent fractured experience. And that's where when if you can turn that into something quantifiable, and it doesn't do what you said kind of earlier in the discussion, which was rely on subjectivity.
Right. That's right. So and it is interesting because I think organizations are struggling to get value from AI powered technologies, and there's just basic stuff that can be done with these types of technologies that are simple to prove the value and simple to prove the ROI, and are tangible, and they're not moonshots and they're not science experiments, but they also require that you're being thoughtful about the architecture and the terminology and the taxonomies and the content models and the workflows and the user journeys. It really does require high fidelity user journeys, not just pretty pictures, but things that can articulate your user's needs in terms that your systems can understand and act upon. And that's usually in metadata terms. But
yeah,
there's a lot that can be done.
Yeah, if you haven't gotten deeper than awareness, consideration, purchase, or learn, listen, decide, or something like that, learn, consider, choose, then you're really not optimized. And that's where I get in. Your customer journeys are very, very complicated, and they're not only on your site. And that's really something
Right.
And we got a great question that actually connects to that, that I'd be interested in your take on it. It said, basically, this was from Joe, and the audience says, natural language understanding, Seth, you kind of pseudo laughed about it. I'll comment on that. How can you take something like natural language understanding, and I assume the person's talking about things like Google natural language understanding, Amazon Comprehend, OpenAI, some other applications. How can you take those types of natural language understanding and natural language generation platform and use it as part of intent analysis? That's a tough question, but I'd be interested in your take on that.
Well, sure. So when you think about what's happening with natural language and natural language understanding, right? You're trying to interpret the intent based on ambiguous language or imprecise language, right? So whenever you think about what a system does with language processing, first of all, there's speech recognition, just saying, okay, what is this person saying, and what is the equivalent text, right? So you're seeing that all the time when you do, text recognition, when you're recording things in your chats, you're using speech recognition when you're doing search. So there's a lot of voice-powered things, but at the end of the day, that voice information is translated into text, and the text, no matter what you do, it has to be text. At some point, it's got to go through text, and then it's the text that you're trying to interpret. You're assuming that you have some level of accuracy, or if it's just a query or a chat or any type of chat interaction or search interaction or text interaction. So voice gets converted to text is text, but it's identifying the intent behind the text. And so one of the things that has to happen is identifying the vocabularies, the products, and the services that are important to your customer and to your organization. And what that does is it makes it easier to interpret the text, right? It makes it easier to recognize the language and convert it to text, and it makes it easier to interpret that. So the way that's done is with a reference architecture. And what you're doing is whenever you're interpreting text, you have to look at something in relation to it. You have to look up, well, what is the meaning of this word, or how does this map to my product or my service? And then you're retrieving some information based on that, and they're all information retrieval mechanisms. So when you're looking at natural language understanding, it's trying to take the variations in how people express a thought and a need, and truly interpreting that accurately, and then retrieving the information that answers a question. People don't want lists of documents; they want the answer. And that's what we're trying to do when we're doing that. Now, natural language understanding, intent is not a single thing. Intent can have multiple dimensions, right? An example I use is Allstate with, I need a liability coverage for employee actions for a employment agency in Massachusetts. Well, there's a whole bunch of different entities in there. And if I match that against a predefined list, I have a better chance of understanding it and interpreting it correctly, and then serving up the content. But it has to be done in such a way that the terms and the concepts that are important have to be in a reference source, and they have to be applied to the content itself. Again, if you're doing a retrieval. So natural language understanding is there's lots of different ways of looking at it, but at the end of the day, it's taking text, it's interpreting that text, and it's retrieving some information. And on the inbound organic search side, it's understanding conceptual relationships in the context of your user's role and need and mental model, right? So that's another piece of this. It's saying these things are ambiguous. They're the search terms, as I mentioned, they're short, they're ambiguous, they're an approximation of an information need. it's trying to disambiguate that by understanding what their intent is and by understanding that customer.
Yeah, I think so, and that's nailed. And I think there's one other additional layer of confusion I typically see, and I don't know if it was the question that behind the person that asked that question, but one thing I see people misinterpreting is the difference between the different meanings, or like word sense disambiguation, where there's actually two meanings on the term, and I care about one of them and I don't care about the other one. That's very, very different than having different intent. And so you've got to separate those two things. They are both parts of this wonderful thing we're speaking of, natural language processing, but they're two completely different processes and disciplines. So when you're doing it, when you're working with a business like an Allstate, they have their own meanings that they care about. But when you're in a search engine perspective, you may have results in the search engine result page that actually gives favorite intent as well as different meanings. So go type in an acronym. You may get one response to the acronym and another. That is not intent fracture. That's two completely different meanings of the word. And Google's just hoping that they're providing something and that they're guessing is going to be the one that's a fit for you. So that's a cool question. A really great question. And also a cool answer. Another really good one, and I think we've got time for a couple more. Really good one was, I understand the need to structure text in a natural way with user intent in mind, but in order to do that, it seems like you're saying you need some sort of app or solution,
some sort of
application.
Some sort of
I assume they need. Is there a tactic to do this by hand if I have a smaller site? I guess that's the assumption here.
Give me the first part of the question again. I'm just
how can I look at my content without automation and scale? Or maybe the out of the box or a free tool to get similar output. Maybe if I have a smaller site.
Yeah, I mean, you always have to look at things manually anyway. And what you're trying to, the problem with just doing it manually is you can quickly be overloaded by volume of information and volume or complexity of concept relationships, right? There's in order to do the research correctly, you need to think about, well, what are all the relationships between my product or my service and my customer's problem? And what are the different ways that they'll label that problem? And what are the different ways that they'll express that problem? What are the ways that they'll try to answer, get an answer for that problem? So there's a lot of data that needs to be kind of sifted through and considered. And you can just look, you can eyeball the content and try to say, what's this about, right? But you're not putting the same capacity to analyze and process that you would with an automated approach. Because again, if you're looking for a lot of different things, you're trying to say, what is the essence of this content, right? What is this content telling me? And there's keyword density, there's phrases in there, there's the relationship to other things. There's the detail and the depth of the content. So again, you can't just do keyword stuffing, or you can't just to put a ton of meaningless information in. You have to be. It just takes a certain amount of work to optimize your content, and if you can shortcut that with some tools, it's going to give you a great deal of productivity boost. But there's text analytics tools that you can download that are free. There's obviously all the Google Analytics and Google Search technologies and tools. But again, if you have a small site, you can certainly eyeball it and certainly use your judgment. But you're probably going to have to, put more subject matter expertise on it and put a lot of time into it. But it certainly can be done.
Yeah, I think it's a good thing. And the manual labor, I think looking at the questioner, person who asked the question, and then type of thing that I'm imagining that they're doing here is if you manually, for example, research search results pages and research search engine results page features to try to gauge intent, if you're manually doing that on a small scale, Yes, you can. It's maybe valuing your time is something you should think about, because we've done these things manually, and it's, to do one proper course of research is going to be 12, 15 hours of time to really put the effort in for one well-researched element. If you do a cost-benefit analysis, I think that's something to also think about. So both of those things are true. It's not going to be as precise. It's not going to be backed up by data, defendable by data. It's going to have subjectivity. It's going to have bias. And then also, how much is the time worth of the person doing that analysis? That's cool. So, so last question we've got. We got a really great question for you. I think they think we have 2 hours. This is a good one. So ontologies and taxonomies, what's the difference between them, and what do you see people, how do you see people misunderstand what a taxonomy is?
Okay, sure. That's a great question. And it's funny, I almost threw some of those slides in here, but I didn't want to, get too deep. Just want to keep it conversational, but I do have materials on it. But think of a taxonomy as a classification scheme. It's a mechanism. It's it's a parent-child whole part type of relationship. It's a hierarchy that makes it easier to understand the content. And think of it this way: hierarchies are for humans, right? Machines don't care. Machines will deal with large lists. They don't care. But humans like grouping principles, and they try to align the structure of a site with their mental models. And that's by saying, well, what do I expect under this category? And what do I expect to find over here? And again, it's trying to build a structure that makes it easier to make a decision. So that's what a taxonomy is. And multiple taxonomies, you never have a single taxonomy, and people would try to have universal folder structure. That doesn't work. You have multiple taxonomies that are orthogonal, right? They're mutually exclusive, and they should be collectively exhaustive of your topics. But what you're trying to do is say, what are all the different dimensions on which I can classify this information? If I had let's say, contract, and that's the isness. It is a contract. This is a contract, this piece of paper. Well, what's the aboutness? What is it about? It's about a real estate transaction. It's about employment law. It's about, whatever it might be. It's a purchase and sale, whatever it might be. That's the aboutness. But then if you have 1,000 of those documents in a pile, what other piles could you put them in? And that's additional aboutness. Those are all taxonomies. Those are all metadata structures. Those are all organizing principles that allow you to classify and organize the information so that you can retrieve it according to your mental model. So that's what taxonomies are, classification structures. Not every classification structure is a taxonomy, but that's another story. But because it's about the is a relationship. Now, there's relationships between taxonomies. So you could say, well, here's my products, here's my services. Well, here's the service that goes with this product. Or here are my solutions, and here are my services or my products, and here's the solutions that go with that product, whatever it might be. And for insurance company, it's risks in regions. Well, what are the risks in these regions? Right? So you have relationships, conceptual relationships between them. That actually creates the knowledge graph. That actually creates the ontology. Think of ontology as a way to describe a domain of knowledge, right? So for insurance, it's products and services and risks and regions and contract types and coverage types and topics and all those different things. In a life sciences firm, it's generic compounds and brand compounds and chemical names and mechanisms of action and diseases and indications and so on, right? And targets. So each of those organizations needs to classify their knowledge across multiple aboutness concepts, right? They need to say, well, how do I describe my domain? If I have my knowledge in this world, and that's what ontology is. It's really it's the description of a domain, but you can also say it's the collection of all the taxonomies and thesaurus structures and the relationships between them that describe this world. So again, it can also be a knowledge graph. People talk about ontologies as knowledge graphs. And I think what the big misconception on taxonomies is people equate taxonomy to navigation, and it's not necessarily navigation. It can be conceptual. The example I give is the concept of methodology in a SharePoint sense. could be a site collection, could be called methodology. A site could be called methodology. A library could be called methodology. A content type could be called methodology. A metadata field could be called methodology, or you could have a term within a list that's called methodology. That's more than navigation, right? It could inform navigation, but it's also, it gets built into multiple tools and platforms at multiple levels of granularity. That's why you start with taxonomy and business needs, not master data, because you're just at the lowest level of that. So that's just a way to kind of think about those ideas and how you need to define them.
Yeah, that's great, Seth, and that's a great description. I think the first time we ever spoke was quite a bit ago, and I think when I told you, I wish that every search engine optimization professional learned what taxonomies were and ontologies were, because the applications of understanding, not just knowing OWL and not just knowing how to do these things, but it's just conceptually build them for yourself. Do this, and you're going to have such an easier time getting by. But I think that's a topic for another day. But I do want to thank you so much, Seth, for joining us. I think this was a really exciting, probably brings a lot of people to want to take action and be more intentional with their content. And there's easy ways to do that. I wanted to comment that Seth has a book on pre-order on Amazon that you can get right now, The AI-Powered Enterprise. I'm really, really excited about this. We also have a free topic report, any topic, any site, fill out the form, sent to you very, very quickly, gives you a detailed gap analysis of where you are within the whole framework of, are you covering this well? Are you doing a good job putting your subject matter expert driven content out there? So fill out that form and you'll have that in your inbox very, very quickly. Seth, again, thank you so much for joining us on the MarketMuse Content Strategy webinar series. And I hope to talk to you real soon.
Absolutely. Thanks, everyone.
All right. Thank you so much. Yes.